This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. This is episode number 126 of the Homestead Journey Podcast. Welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Wells. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful upstate New York. And folks, we actually had snow early this week, and now it is gorgeous outside, and it feels like I'm way behind. The homestead is kicked into high gear this week. So much to cover. So let's hop on over to this week's homestead happenings, and I will bring you up to speed with what we've been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead. The first thing that I wanted to mention is that I had the opportunity this week to be featured on a podcast called the Understory Lawyer. And it was a podcast that I had never listened to before. I was unaware of it. It's a little bit more in the business genre. And so I don't really do much in that space. But one of the things that Wade does cover in his 5 principles is the principle of, I believe he refers to it as self-reliance. And there is a certain homesteading component to not just his show, but the way that they are living their lives, the direction that they're taking their lives. And so he invited me onto his show. And of course, you know me, I like to talk, probably way too much. And I certainly love to share with people about homesteading. And so I had the opportunity to be on that podcast. It was a great conversation with Wade, at least I think it was. So if you missed that, I will have a link to the episode in the show notes, but I also did put it out on our social media. So check on Facebook and you'll be able to get a link to it. But thank you so much, Wade, for inviting me onto that. It was just a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. Now, one of the things that was kind of funny is in the title, he referred to me as a master homesteader. And so I took a little bit of grief from people on that. People just kind of ribbing me a little bit, giving me a bit of a hard time about that moniker. One of my listeners, a guy by the name of Kevin, reached out to me and said that I needed to have business cards made up, but the business card would need 2 sides because it would say Brian Wells, master homesteader, connoisseur of fine swine, champion of the heritage breeds, coyote tractor enthusiast, practitioner of unique and varied garden techniques, instructor of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, sustainability, and snowboarding, co-owner of Chicken Boarding House, world-renowned podcaster, and world champion thumb wrestler. And then he went on to say, I have no proof of the last one, but it felt right. I had such a kick out of that, Kevin. Thank you so much. And so I just felt like I would share that with everyone. I am not sure about the master homesteader bit. Probably the rest of it is fairly accurate, except for the world champion thumb wrestler. Although you never know, I might throw my hat into that ring. That conversation did lead to a very, very awesome opportunity this week. And I mentioned this in this week's blog. So if you don't follow the blog, thehomesteadjourney.net/blog is some of my musings, writings, so on and so forth. And that was something that came as a request from the survey that we did back in November. And I did take a week off last week. My apologies for that, but it was Holy Week, had family in town. And so I just decided to skip a week on the blog. But this week I detailed the exciting opportunity that I had that came as a result of being on that podcast. And to kind of sum it up, I was making small talk with Wade before we started recording the podcast, and he mentioned that he had interviewed an author from upstate New York previously on his show. And I said, oh, great. Whereabouts in upstate New York? And he said to me, well, a place called Greenwich. I said, oh, no, you mean Greenwich. And that happens to be the town in which I live. And so one thing led to another, and I actually had the opportunity to meet that author on Friday evening. Wonderful, wonderful guy. I had such a great time walking around his homestead, looking at his garden. And folks, His garden is just absolutely beautiful. He has it laid out like a colonial kitchen garden. And the moment I saw it, that's what popped into my head. I was like, wow, this looks like a colonial kitchen garden. And then as we were walking through it, he told me that was the vibe that he was going for. And he just absolutely nailed it. He's got a great orchard. He's got perennials, berries, and so forth, nuts. He's got chickens. And it was just a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. And so hopefully this week, if everything all works out correctly, he's going to come over here and visit my homestead. And I'm so excited to share that with him. But it was just, it was so awesome that here I am. I'm talking to a guy down in Virginia. I believe that's where Wade is located at. And through that, I got connected to a fellow homesteader in my own hometown. How awesome is that? Shall we all sing? It's a small world. Okay, I won't bore you with that. But yeah, I mean, it's a small world. And it's just, I don't know. It was very awesome to me. Very exciting. I can't even, words fail me at this moment. But it was so much, it was so fun. And actually, the other thing that was really, really cool is I had actually read one of his books. And so, yeah, just all around cool, great guy, and looking forward to showing off my homestead to him this coming week. Some of the other things that went on this week, I made turkey broth from the turkey carcass that we had on Easter Sunday and canned that up. And oh my goodness, folks, it's just so deep and rich and just so good. Very, very excited to do that. Kind of kicking off, I guess, canning season 2022 a little bit earlier than I normally do, but 4 quarts and 1 pint. So 4.5 quarts of turkey broth ready to be used in the future. And I just can't wait. It tastes so good. Our broiler chicks arrived this week. We ordered them from Valley Farms Hatchery, and they all arrived healthy and happy. And we have experienced 0 losses with this batch of chicks up to this point. So very excited about that. But I've got to get those pine shavings going down there because they're less than a week old and they're starting to stink the place up. So I've got to really get some pine shavings in there because it reminds me of why I stopped doing it in the basement. Had to do it again this year. Hopefully next year I will have my second mobile brooder built and ready to rock and roll. And I won't have to do this again because they stink. They are little stinkers. Let's move on to a piglet update. The 7 piglets that we have here on the farm are doing great. They've been out enjoying the warmth and out in the sunshine, running around, kind of jumping from pen to pen. And they're just so much fun to watch. I really, really enjoy watching them. They're getting fat and sassy and so excited to have them here. So we have the 7 piglets here, but I do have some bad news. And that is the second sow over at Beardsley Zoo unfortunately passed away in giving birth. And it's very, very sad when that happens. I've said before on this show, as my buddy Dave says, when you have livestock, eventually you're going to have dead stock, but it doesn't make it any less painful. In this instance, I am very, very glad that that sow was at the zoo because she was given every opportunity to survive. They did a C-section on her. There was a large piglet that was stuck and it was dead. And unfortunately, out of the piglets that she had, only 2 survived. The good news is the first mother is fostering those piglets. And so she's gone from 5 to 7 piglets and doesn't think anything about it. That works out great. But it is very, very sad that one of those pigs didn't make it. She had access to the best care possible. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. Very, very sad. But I'm glad that she was there where she was very, very well cared for. And we'll just move on from this, trying to figure out if I'm going to send another pig over there or not. We'll figure all of that out in the future. But I did want to provide you with that update. Saturday was a busy day here on and off the homestead. Saturday morning, I went up to a local machinery auction. They do small things to kind of kick the day off, and then they move on to tractors and really worn out pieces of farm equipment. Some of the stuff that people bring, I'm just like, why didn't you just push that over the bank? Why didn't you just put that in the bin? But it's always a lot of fun to go there and to talk to other people, to run into people that maybe you haven't seen in a while. And so I was able to actually run into a couple of people that are a part of the poultry barn at our fair and to talk to them about whether or not they thought we would be able to actually have a poultry show this summer at the fair because of avian influenza. Right now, it's not looking good. Right now, it's not looking good. New York State is supposed to reevaluate things in May, but right now it's just not looking good. And it doesn't look like we're going to be able to exhibit poultry at our wonderful fair, the Washington County Fair, this year. And that's very, very disappointing because my son is getting to the end of his youth poultry exhibition days. And so it's just very disappointing. 2 years ago, there was no fair. Back in 2014 or 2015, we missed out on a year because of avian influenza. So it's just very disappointing for him. But it is what it is. They're trying to do the right thing by the backyard poultry flocks and by the breeders and exhibitors. And so we'll just roll with it. But it is very, very disappointing nonetheless. Saturday afternoon, I spent the afternoon declaring war on invasive honeysuckle. We just have honeysuckle all over the place up here, but up near the front of our road, along the edge of our driveway, there was a lot of it. The branches were starting to kind of grow out into the driveway and scrape the side of the car. And then there were big bushes of it that I was having to mow around, which is a pain in the neck. But then as the summer progresses and the honeysuckle plant is starting to put off those red honeysuckle berries, we used to call them dog berries as I was growing up, but those things kind of get knocked off the plant onto your clothes and stain your clothes. And it's just an absolute pain in the neck. But then this week I read an article where they say that honeysuckle is a great promoter of the tick population. And I hate ticks. So it just kind of gave me that extra incentive to declare war. I went out with a chainsaw and the tractor and knocked down a lot of the honeysuckle, pushed some of it, just dug it right up out and pushed it back into the woods. And there was one section actually where our driveway kind of comes up a hill and makes a sharp bend to the left. A couple of weeks ago, Bonnie and she was coming in and I was going out, and we almost hit head on there because we couldn't see through that honeysuckle. So that was another great reason to just knock that big old thing down. But now I have some more place to put, I don't know, garden. Am I going to put vegetables there, or am I going to put fruit trees there, or I don't know what I'm going to put there, but I got to do something with it so it doesn't grow back. So if you've got some ideas, some thoughts on what I should grow there, thinking maybe some berry bushes, I don't know. Our blueberries don't do really good where they're at. So maybe I should buy some blueberries and put them over there. My raspberries haven't done very well where they're at. So maybe I should buy some more raspberries and put them over there. I don't know. I'm just kind of playing around with some ideas, but what I know is I got to get something over there because I don't want to just waste that space and let that honeysuckle come on back. The last thing I wanted to share with you is that today I got out and I spent some time in the garden. I've got some more peas planted. I've got some lettuce planted, and I will be continuing to do that throughout this upcoming week, getting some of that early stuff in the ground, spinach, turnips. I'm trying to remember even all what it's on my list. Carrots. I'll be hopefully getting those planted. Things that can handle that cool weather. Swiss chard. Going to try to get all of that started. Earliest I think I've ever started anything besides peas out in my garden. And so excited about that. It's just getting busy here, folks, on the homestead. And I'm enjoying it, but I feel a little bit overwhelmed, feel a little bit behind because that's just how it is. I watch some of these YouTubers that live down south, and some of them are already harvesting stuff. And so it really does make me feel a little bit like I'm behind the eight ball when I'm really not, but I feel like I am. And so it's just like, boom, let's go. And we're going to go. All right, before we head on over to this week's Charting the Course, I did just want to remind you about the Just the Basics series. Now, I know it's been a couple of weeks since I've released anything. I released the Meat Bird printable a couple of weeks ago. Last week, again, being Holy Week, having family in town, I didn't get anything done. But this week, I did get some work done on getting started with pigs. I know it's a little late to be putting that out, but I'm going to get it put out. And then I'm probably going to take a couple of weeks off from putting the printables out just because I'm going to have to really get the garden going. And then I'll get back to it and I'll be releasing additional printables on canning, freezing, dehydrating, and just a bunch of other great topics. So if you haven't already signed up for those, head on over to thehomesteadjourney.net/basics. That'll get you signed up. And then as I release additional printable guides, I will notify you and you'll be able to download them, print them out, put them in your binder, and really give your homestead that jumpstart to take things to the next level. All right, let's head on over to this week's Charting the Course. Go big or go home. On today's Charting the Course, we're going to talk about why I don't think that approach to homesteading is one that is going to lead to a successful outcome. Before we jump into this podcast, though, let me just define that phrase, perhaps for those of you who aren't from the United States, who maybe aren't familiar with that term. Maybe that's not a phrase that's used where you come from. To us in the States, go big or go home really is saying give something 110%, give it your best effort, give it your all, put all of your effort and energy into this enterprise, experience something to its fullest, be extravagant, don't cut corners, don't cut costs, just do the thing, whatever it takes to get it done. And there's certainly some good to be said in all of that. But I also think that that approach is very, very flawed and eventually will lead to less than optimal outcomes. Now, some of this that we're going to talk about today is stuff that I've covered before on this podcast. And so if you've been a longtime listener, maybe it's going to feel like this is a bit of a repeat episode. But I think that this topic is very, very important to visit from time to time. Because if for nobody else, I need to hear this. I need to remind myself that going big might lead to me going home. So let's explain. Over the last several weeks on Facebook, I have seen 3 particular posts that illustrated people diving into homestead head first, going big or going home in ways that I don't think will lead to successful outcomes. The first one happened on a pastured poultry group that I'm a member of. I don't have the post in front of me, but it was something like this. I just got my first meat chicks ever, 160 of them. What? You've never raised meat birds before, and you've got 160 of them? I don't even remember the rest of the post. All I know is that it left me scratching my head, asking myself a lot of questions. Does this individual know how to butcher chickens? Have they ever done this before? Do they have the equipment necessary to do this? If they're not planning on butchering the chickens themselves, are they going to take them to a processor? And if they're going to take them to a processor, have they already reserved the dates? Do they have freezer space for 160 chickens? How big is their family? I mean, all of these questions came into my mind. 160 birds, folks, that's a lot of chickens. And if you have never done this before, and that's what was said in that post, 160 chickens, well, I admire the enthusiasm. That, folks, is a recipe for disaster. Now, maybe this person already had a wonderful plan, and I'm making way too many assumptions. Maybe they had already booked a date with a processor. Maybe they had gone into this with friends and family, and they were going to be divvying this up amongst many different families. Or maybe they have 12 or 15 kids, and so they would eat 160 chickens. Maybe they've gone to a poultry processing class, or maybe they've never raised chickens before, but they've helped other people process poultry. I want to be careful that I don't make far too many assumptions, but if you've never raised meat birds before, I don't think that jumping in and doing a batch of 160 as your first batch ever is going to be a recipe for success. I wish I could go back and find the post and do a follow-up on it to find out how that individual fared. But if I had to guess, they lost a lot of chicks and they ended up frustrating, and they'll probably never raise meat chickens again. The second post I saw earlier this week, this is somebody who was very, very enthusiastic, but in my opinion, this go big or go home mentality wasn't going to end up very well. Let me read the post to you. We are getting goats, 25 goats. My husband has finally gotten on board and supporting our homesteading ideas. So he put a contract in and he's cutting someone's trees. They will pay him $2,500 for the job and 25 goats. All I know at the moment is he thinks they are dwarf goats. So we will have goats, chickens, rabbits on the farm. I plan to get a few LGD or livestock guardian dogs, pups for the goats, and I also need some barn cats. Where do you guys find your barn cats? Wow, there's so much to unpack in here. And again, this go big or go home mentality that's just going to not lead to a good outcome, in my opinion. And let me also pause here, folks. I want to reiterate, I am not poking fun at anyone. Okay. I want to be very, very clear on that. But I also believe that the best way to learn is not from your mistakes, but it's from other people's mistakes. And in my opinion, what's taking place here is a lot of mistakes. So as I look at this, first of all, we've got somebody here who is brand new to homesteading. Their husband has not been on board with the whole homesteading idea. And now all of a sudden they're going from 0 to 25 goats. Oh my goodness. Folks, goats have a high learning curve. If you talk to anybody who has raised goats, they will tell you that. Goats can be very, very dumb. They are notoriously hard to keep in their pens. They will climb fences. They will get themselves into situations that is just unimaginable. And goats are difficult animals to raise. And to go from 0 to 25 goats is wow. It doesn't seem to me, and I do realize that I'm reading between the lines a little bit here, but it seems to me that there's a great chance that these people don't have any infrastructure in place. So they're getting 25 goats, and now they've got to build infrastructure. They've got to have housing. They've got to have fencing. They have to have feeders. They have to have all of this stuff for 25 goats. But not only that, they don't even know what kind of goats they're getting. Are these dwarf goats? Are these Nubians? What kind of goats are these? And are they males? Are they females? Are they wethers, which are castrated males? What kind of goats are these? But they've got 25 goats on the way. Now, let me just dive into that a little bit. If they're 25 males, you're going to have 25 stinky billy goats running around the place. If they are 25 females, what if those 25 females have been bred and they all have one kid apiece? Now your 25 goats has gone to 50 goats. But goats can sometimes have twins. They can sometimes have triplets. So let's say they have twins. Now you've gone from 25 goats to 75 goats. What? This is crazy. And now, are you going to milk these? Let's say they're 25 goats and they're in milk. Do you have a milking machine? Like, what is the plan here? We've got 25 goats. Woohoo! What are you going to do with your 25 goats? But not just that. On top of that, well, let's get some livestock guardian dog pups. So now you've got 25 goats, but now you've got to train livestock guardian dogs to take care of the goats, which I don't even know how all that works, but I know that it's just not something that happens overnight. So now you're adding stress upon stress. But not only that, let's go get some barn cats. Wow. 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 They're going big here, folks. But my guess is that husband isn't going to be on board with homesteading for very long. That just does not seem to me, in my opinion, not knowing all the facts, but what I read here, they're going big. But my fear is they're going to be going home. The last post I saw was this. We're new to farming. We have chickens. Curious what animals we should add to the farm next. We're deciding between goats or donkeys. Are goats and donkeys easy to care for? Which are easier? Now, I do want to give them props in that they are asking questions before they just went out and got 25 goats. Okay, so at least they're trying to formulate a plan here. I give them credit for that. But folks, goats and donkeys are two vastly different animals. And I'm trying to figure out what is the plan here. I could understand if they said, should we get goats or should we get a family milk cow? Okay, they're trying to do dairy. That makes sense to me. Or should we get a long-haired goat or should we get sheep? Okay, they're in it for the fiber. But goats or donkeys, I'm not trying to make fun of them. But what's the plan? Why are we doing this? Why are you getting the goats? Why are you getting the donkeys? And people in the comments did reply and very kindly. Nobody was giving them a hard time about it, but they were asking them, well, what's your plan? What are you trying to do with these animals? It's not just about a matter of going out and buy animals. Folks, feed is not cheap. Now, if you're independently wealthy, good on you. Go ahead and buy all the animals and raise all the things. I'm not trying to rain on your parade, but if you're going to bring animals onto your farm, you got to factor in feed. You've got to factor in housing. You got to factor in vet bills. There's just so many things you need to take into consideration. And it's just not a matter of what animal should we get next? I don't know. I don't know what your situation is. I don't know what your plan is, what your desires are, what your goals are. I can't tell you. Just to say, should we get goats or donkeys? And again, folks, I'm not making fun because I think all of us at one time or another have been guilty of doing some of these things. We jump into this with great enthusiasm. We're going to go big or go home. And we overwhelm ourselves and we end up going home. We end up throwing in the towel. We end up quitting. We end up walking away because we got in way too deep. We got in over our heads. We were enthusiastic, but we were not wise. And so today there's three things that I want to remind you of. Three things that you need to consider that I think will help you rein in this go big or go home mentality. The first thing is when you start anything, start small. If you're going to start with chickens, start with a half dozen or a dozen. If you're going to start with pigs, start with a couple of feeder pigs. Don't do like I did and go from 0 to 16 pigs overnight. That's not wise. I made it through it, but it certainly was not wisdom on my part to do that. If you're going to start gardening, don't go from no garden to 4,000 square feet of garden. You're going to overwhelm yourself with weeds, with watering, with caring for the plants, it's just not a recipe for success. So the first thing is start small. Get a feel for it. Find out whether or not you like whatever it is. If you get into rabbits, you may decide that you don't like rabbits. Or you get into pigs, you might decide that you don't like pigs. And it is easier to sell 1 or 2 pigs than it is to sell 16 or 18 or 20 or 30 or whatever. So start small. The second thing is understand your why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Are we doing it just because everybody else is doing it? Are we doing it because Joe Blow in Idaho recommended that we do it, not even knowing our situation? Are we doing it because we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, or we just feel like it's the next step that we have to take? Why are we doing what we're doing, or why are we thinking about doing what we're going to do? In the case of these people with goats, are they getting into it for the meat? Are they getting into it for the milk? Are they getting into it for the fiber? I don't know. I can't answer those questions, but there are some goats that are great for meat and they're not great for fiber, or they're not great for milk. There are some goats that are great for milk, but they're not great for fiber. They're not great for meat. There are some goats that are great for fiber, but they're not. You understand what I'm saying? So if we're getting into goats, we need to understand our why to make sure that we get the right kind of goats and not just 25 random goats that somebody's wanting to get rid of. And that's one of the other things too that's probably a little bit problematic with regards to that particular post, is that they're getting these 25 goats given to them. My question is, are these really good quality goats? My guess is probably they're not the best quality goats, but I could be wrong. Again, don't know the situation, don't want to assume too much, but it does seem to me, at least, that there isn't a well thought out plan here where they understand their why of getting those goats. Now, maybe they do understand the why. They're thinking, oh, we're going to milk these goats and we're going to make cheese and all of this great stuff. And maybe it'll work out. Maybe these 25 goats will be great milking goats. I hope they are. But it could be that they're expecting to milk them and they get 25 boys. You're not getting milk from 25 boys. At least not any milk that I would want to drink. And we'll just leave it there. Not only should we understand our why, but we should also have a very clear plan. Now, I want to be careful with regards to this one, because sometimes we can spend so much time planning that we never get to doing. Don't let great get in the way of good enough. We don't need to have everything perfect. We don't need to have all of the best equipment. We don't need to have the best of the best of the best to get started. There are some times when we just need to get started. But we do need to have at least some semblance of a plan before we do get started, and not try to figure it out along the way. I can't tell you how many times I will read on a Facebook homesteading group someone saying, we need to process our chickens next week. Does anybody in XYZ area have a plucker that we could borrow? What? You knew that you were going to be processing these chickens, and now all of a sudden you're looking for a plucker? Again, have a little bit of a plan there. And I'm trying not to be harsh here, folks. If this comes across as harsh, please understand, I am not trying to be harsh or picking a fight with anybody. But I want you to be successful in your homesteading adventures. And so put a little thought into the plan, not just making it up as you go along. Because if you've got 160 broilers to process next weekend and you don't have a plucker, that's a lot of hand plucking. And that's going to suck. And you're probably not going to get it all done in a weekend, especially if this is your first rodeo. So at least have some semblance of a plan. But your plan should also include an exit strategy. So if you get into goats and you decide that you don't like goats, what are you going to do with the goats that you've just gotten? What's your exit strategy? Your exit strategy simply may be you're going to post them on Facebook. That's a little tricky. Maybe better to post them on Craigslist because Facebook doesn't like us selling livestock. Maybe that's your exit strategy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But also understand you may end up having to keep those goats for quite a bit longer than you would like to, because maybe people have decided they don't want to buy goats, or maybe it's the wrong time of the year for them to buy goats. So it is very important that you do have an exit strategy in case whatever it is that you're getting into just isn't your cup of tea. And there are certain things that it's very easy to get out of. If you decide that you're going to try gardening and you don't like gardening, it's not that big of a deal to take your garden and turn it back into lawn or turn it into a flower bed or whatever. But if you've got 160 Cornish cross chickens and you don't have the equipment to process them and you don't have a date with the processor, that's a lot of chickens to deal with till you can get things figured out if you don't have some semblance of a plan and some semblance of an exit strategy. So folks, my goal with this podcast is twofold. Number one is to remind myself not to get carried away and to jump into things with a great amount of enthusiasm and a lack of thought and planning being put into whatever endeavor it is. But the other reason why I'm bringing this topic up is because I want to help you to not squash your enthusiasm, not that at all, but to temper it a little bit. Don't try to raise and grow and do all the things at once. Start small and start with one or two things. Understand your why. Understand why it is that you're trying to do what you're going to try to do. And then make sure that you have a plan. And in that plan, include an exit strategy. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you have any questions or comments, reach out to me. Brian at thehomesteadjourney.net is my email address, or you can reach out to us via our social media accounts. More than happy to answer any questions, or if you disagree with me, for us to have a conversation about it. Until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.